Well, good morning, everyone. If you've turned around and given someone your best Sunday smile, good job. So welcome to this month series, and you can see here that the label of this month's series is Rewriting the World, Your Role in God's Story of Shalom. And if you don't know who I am, I'm a father of 4 children. Abigail, who's 31, Ben Hannon, who's 30, Anna, who's 29, and Emily, who's 27. And I have 3 grandchildren, Naya, who is 3, Bodhi, who is 4, nearly 4, Naya, who turned 3, and Eden, who is 1, nearly 2 years. Jeepers. And my 4th grandchild is due to be born on September the 20th. Yeah, all right. And part-time, I'm the head of school at TCIS. Okay. But one of my best roles is being husband and friend to my beautiful wife, Jane, at the back there. Hi, babe. Hi. So students, I mentioned her because she lives in the residence building so that you treat her properly, don't be rude, you now know who she is, okay. When you think of the word purpose, what comes to mind? So the word purpose, what do you think of when you think of purpose? When you think of the importance of having purpose, what do you think about? We know that having a sense of purpose can help you discover who you are, what you like, what you don't like. It also helps to give you direction in a very, very busy world. And it can motivate you in terms of doing things that are positive. It can help you build confidence and resilience. And so purpose is really important. And the title this morning of the series, Rewriting the World, speaks to purpose. It's a powerful idea that suggests that you can change the world, much like a writer changes a story. It means that your actions, big and small, can make a real difference in making the world a different place, a better place. And so, great. You notice here that your role is underlined. And this suggests that everyone has a special part to play in creating a peaceful world in God's story. The theme is about recognizing that you're not just a bystander in the world. You're not here by mistake. You're a participant with the power to affect change. It calls you to think about how you can act in ways that promote peace, and we'll go into that, understanding and cooperation around the people you know, and dare I challenge you and myself, globally. And so, your role and involvement is in God's story of shalom and of peace. And you can see here a quote from a philosopher from Yale, Nicholas Waterstroff. Shalom, peace, is a harmony and delight in all one's relationships with God, neighbor, nature, and self. And what I'd like to do is look at a definition of shalom from somebody. Does anyone know Mr. Han? Can you put your hand up? Do you know Mr. Han? Great. Were you at the grade 9-10 retreat? Some of you? Okay. So what I want to do is I want to take his definition of shalom. He spoke at the baccalaureate service last year, and I want to share what he has actually talked about. And so he says, in the Bible, there's an important idea called shalom. Shalom is a word that means peace in many different languages, but shalom is about more than just the absence of conflict. It's about creating true well-being, harmony, and wholeness in our communities. And that's what we can see here in this definition from Nicholas Waterstroff. But when we're looking at this peace, we need to ask ourselves, how is it achieved? Well, Mr. Hahn directs it to Jesus. And he says, peace is simply the fruit of being near Jesus. Because he's the Prince of Peace. He says to his followers in John 14:27, peace I leave to you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. And a very simple lesson from this is that peace can be given, and it's given by someone who calls himself the Prince of Peace, and so that's an interesting thing to consider. Mr. Hahn goes on to say that Jesus says to people who are anxious, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden or burdened, and I will give you rest, peace. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Why? For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find peace for your souls. If you're lacking peace, Jesus is calling you to turn to him and follow his humble and gentle guidance to find true peace within your soul. And I just want to talk about that for a little bit. So heart, your dispositions, your emotions, how you react. Soul is really, what is the soul? It's a part of you that's created by God, which I believe is eternal. It's that part of you that came alive when God breathed into Adam and he became a living soul. It's spiritual, and it's that deep-seated part of you that pulls everything together, and it's down deep. And that's where Jesus says he gives peace. Mr. Hahn goes on to say, not only does Jesus offer us inner peace by coming to him, but he also calls his followers to be agents of peace in a world around them. Just as Jesus' mission was to be a peacemaker, he calls his followers to also have that mission of being peacemakers. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. I just want to help you see the logical progression here. Peace comes from the author of peace, the Prince of Peace, Jesus, who's able to give peace to those who are looking for peace that goes down into their souls. And as you become a peacemaker, he says, you become my child. When you pursue the peace that Jesus gives, something happens, and here Jesus says, you will be called the children of God. There's a transaction, an action that takes place. I'm sorry, I can't give you a scientific formula for you, but the logical progression leads to people becoming part of God's family. Interesting thought. Mr. Hahn goes on to say, you see, God is in the business of restoring that beautiful harmony called Shalom, a state of wholeness, well-being, and right relationships. Side note, I'm really glad I can just quote him because it makes it easier for me. That's a really great statement. He goes on to say, and God is inviting you to be part of that important work. There's an invitation there. You're called to be peacemakers, those who resolve to realign what is disordered back to God's original loving design. Kamsahamnida, Mr. Hahn. Thank you. So this is the calling that you have, the role that God wants you to be a part of. And so obviously the next question to ask is this: a part of what? What is your story, God? Where does it come from? What's this story of Shalom? And so I want us to consider Shalom from the Bible, because that is where this comes from. And it's interesting that when we look at the Bible and the different messages, stories, topics, and events in the Bible, sometimes our understanding of the Bible can be like a jigsaw puzzle. Lots of ideas and topics, but how do they tie together? How do we understand God's story? And there are very many people, much more cleverer than Mr. MOIMOI, who have created different formats and outlines and frameworks for people to understand the Bible. But what I'd like to do is really just allow us to look at the Bible and see 6 major areas, big, broad strokes, to help us understand the story as we find in the Bible. So we see creation, we see the fall, we see Israel, Jesus, the church, looking into the future, the new creation. And we find these major themes help us understand the Bible. Pretty simple. But what happens when we put shalom, that sense of wholeness and completeness, into the middle of that? If we use that as a connecting theme, we find an outline to help us understand God's story. You see, God's story isn't about topics. It's about how does it all hold together. And shalom helps us to see that. So let's take time to actually understand these things. And from there, you can see that creation becomes making shalom. The fall is breaking shalom. Israel is seeking shalom. Jesus is saving shalom. The church is embracing shalom. And as we look into the future, the new creation, that comes to us in the form of entering shalom, entering the wholeness that God wants for us. So let's take time to actually do a little bit of a deep dive into some of these things as we set the scene for this month's series. So this is the long introduction to our month's series in Rewriting the World. In creation and making shalom, we see that God created the world in a state of perfect peace and harmony. He said, "It is good," over and over again, where everything worked together flawlessly. Humans were given the responsibility to care for and maintain this harmony, acting as stewards of the earth. That was their role, their purpose. It was known, it was evident. The relationship between God and man was whole. The relationship between God and nature was whole. The relationship between God and man and other people, Adam and Eve, it was whole, it was complete. There was that deep sense of shalom there that God had created. And then we move to the fall, the breaking of shalom. And here we see when humans make that decision, they choose to disobey God, it has disrupted the perfect peace, the wholeness, introducing pain, suffering, death, and disorder into the world. We have a new concept come into this created space, and it's described as sin. That wasn't there, is now there. And this event is known as the fall, and it affected every aspect of creation. There is absolutely nothing that has not been affected by the fall. When we go into the next stage of the Bible, we see Israel seeking shalom. And we see here that God from one man seeks to continue to work with humanity. And from there, that family, that people group, there is a nation. And so God chooses the nation of Israel to demonstrate how to live according with his laws and restore peace, up and down relationship. And this stage is about Israel's struggles with judges and kings and prophets and their successes and their failures in trying to live up to this divine calling of shalom that God has not given up on. We see in the next stage of Jesus saving shalom that Jesus comes to fully restore the peace that was lost during the fall through his life, his teachings, death, and resurrection, in which he has provided a way for all humanity, you and I, to return to a state of harmony, peace, wholeness, shalom with God and with each other. After his resurrection, 50 days later, we have an event called Pentecost, and we see that after Jesus saving shalom, we have the church embracing shalom. Here, all those who choose to follow Jesus, who align themselves to the Prince of Peace, become part of the church. All believers are called to continue Jesus' work by spreading his message of peace and reconciliation. This involves living out the teachings of Jesus and working together as a community to heal and unite the world in God's shalom. The Bible also speaks about things to come. and here the new creation entering Shalom. And this final stage, if we call it a final stage, looks forward to the future when God will completely renew the world. Really bizarre thought, right? Creating a new heaven, a new earth, where peace and justice will reign forever. And those who have chosen to align themselves to following Jesus, believers, anticipate this perfect state where they will live in eternal harmony with God. And so there we have, in that sense, just a framework from Shalom, the story found in the Bible that we're calling God's story of Shalom. It's God's wholeness and complete work at the center helps us to see that God's story is active. It is at work now. And it gives us understanding to where humanity has come from, where humanity is now, and where humanity is going in the future. And I know that I'm just presenting a framework, and I'd like to thank the theologian David Benson, who wrote about this, and which I've taken to be able to share to you. But I really want to stress this important point here, is that I'm not talking about an ideology or some sort of philosophy, because in God's economy, it's actually alive, it's working, it's real, it's present. And so I want to make a little bit of a transition here, and because we know that God's story exists in a world where there's lots of stories, right? There's not just the Bible story. There are other stories. And I think it's important to consider that there are other stories in life that people follow, they create, they believe, and they seek after. And so I want to take time for us to engage in some of these, and I want to compare and contrast them to God's story of Shalom and peace. Now, I don't have time to compare them to every story that's out there, but I've chosen 4 that are sort of like the big ideologies, philosophies that are present in Western world, Western thought. I haven't chosen to compare it to other religions because they are all in that same sense of being religious practices, and I haven't necessarily chosen to work in really clear cultural context. For instance, if you are Korean, family is really important to you, and that's not the only culture where family is important. I haven't done that. But what I'd like to do is utilize a conversation between a group of friends, and the first person we're going to see is Joe. And so Joe starts with this question. Joe. Hey, everyone. I've been thinking a lot about how we all see the world differently based on our beliefs. I'm curious, how do each of you view your role in the world? Tom, that's a great question. For me, it's about using reason and ethical principles to make society better. I believe we don't need religious doctrines to determine what's right. Human reason is enough to guide us to treat each other well and build a just society. So, I resonate with that, but I lean more on science. I think understanding the world through science is crucial. We can use scientific discoveries to solve problems, from climate change to medical challenges, and improve our quality of life. It's about empirical evidence and practical solutions. Liz, I see the value in both your points, but I also think it's important to appreciate the diversity of cultural narratives. No single worldview should dominate because each culture has its unique insights and wisdom. We should aim for a world where all perspectives are respected equally. Jim, for me, it's actually about carving out your own path. Since we can't really know if there's a divine plan, we should focus on what we can observe and decide for ourselves what seems right. Our actions should be based on personal convictions and a willingness to coexist peacefully with different beliefs. So I just end that there. In this conversation, it appears respectful and informative. Each person is providing a different perspective on the world and what they believe and why they believe. And so now what I want us to do is just continue with the conversation. And I've taken the liberty to build the conversation to Joe's perspective. And the reason why I'm doing that is because, again, my topic is Shalom, God's story. And so I want to just show just a little bit of an interplay between Joe and the other perspectives. And I'm going to say here that they see Joe's perspective in a positive light, even though they don't agree. Okay? And the reason why I do that is because often it's not seen in a positive light. So I thought we'd just do it a little bit different. Okay, so here we go. I appreciate hearing all of your views. From my perspective, all our actions are part of a larger divine narrative that God has set. This story, from creation through redemption, restoration, guides us to live in ways that restore peace and harmony, aligning with what God intends for the world. It's about seeing our lives as part of God's story of peace, of shalom. Let's see what Tom says. It's interesting, Joe, because while I focus on human capabilities alone, you see a divine purpose behind these capabilities. I guess we both value improvement and ethics, but our sources are different. Sue, and why I rely on data and evidence to understand the world, Joe, you integrate that with spiritual beliefs. I like how you find harmony between science and spirituality. Liz, Joe, I like how you find a universal truth that connects everyone. In cultural relativism, we tend to focus more on preserving individual cultural identities. But I can see how you're taking a story that could unite us all. Jim, yeah. And even though I'm skeptical about the existence of a divine plan, being honest, I respect how that belief gives you a clear framework to operate within. It must be comforting to feel part of something bigger like that. Definitely. And I really value hearing from each of you. It's important that we share and learn from our different perspectives. Maybe by understanding each other's views, we can all contribute to a better world, each in our own way. End of conversation. It's evident that there are different stories that people seek to find meaning and purpose. And you can see from Joe's perspective that God's story of Shalom enables him to be able to see how they can compare and contrast to other stories, but not necessarily be defensive or argumentative about it. And I realized that the conversation was weighted towards Joe's perspective of the completeness of God's story of Shalom. But it's important to see that for those who actually engage in that story, there is a purpose there for you. That when someone has a foundation in this understanding of God's story of Shalom, they can see where others are at, they can see the similarities or differences, and they don't need to feel threatened or defensive about it. When we move on, a key aspect that I want to draw our attention when we return back to the outline is that, again, we are involved in a dynamic story that looks back to where God has been working and active and is now present today and is moving forward, and you are part of it, and we're at this stage here, the church, embracing Shalom. That's where you are, that's where I am, and God's story. That's where we are right now. And so I want to just provide for you, that's the introduction to Rewriting the World, your role in God's story. As we go through this series, we're actually going to go deeper in unpacking the other stages. But for now, it's important for you to remember some key takeaways. First, that the Bible can be understood in a framework of God's story of Shalom. Other key takeaways for you to consider is that you are part of a bigger story. Your life is not just a series of random events, but part of a larger divine narrative where you have a meaningful role. In God's story of Shalom, you're called to be an active participant in restoring peace and harmony in the world, aligning your action with God's plan for creation, restoration, and renewal. And we will look into what those practical things look like. And you may be surprised at Mr. MOIMOI's perspective on some things, but anyway, surprise. And next, seeking Shalom, peace, and wholeness brings purpose. You know, Shalom is more than just peace. It's about wholeness, well-being, and right relationship with God, with others, and with creation and yourself. When and if we embrace this concept, we see that we're invited to live in a way that promotes justice, compassion, community, as we reflect on the peace of Jesus in everyday life. And the final takeaway is engaging with different perspectives enhances understanding. I hope that while you follow God's story of Shalom, that you find the importance of respecting other worldviews. That engaging with diverse beliefs will actually allow you and I to deepen our own faith, not detract from it, and possibly find common ground where different stories intersect with a pursuit of a better world. I'm not sure where this quote comes from, but it is simply, all truth is God's truth, and it doesn't necessarily matter where it comes from, but it's really latching onto that truth to see how God is at work in many places around the world. And the importance of recognizing that these differences and connections can actually empower you to be a thoughtful peacemaker. There's a certain set of skills and dispositions that peacemakers have that enable them to bring about peace. And therefore, hopefully, you and I can be active contributors to God's ongoing work, to God's story of Shalom. Next week, we will dive deeper into creation, making Shalom, and for breaking Shalom. And I hope that you join, because I really want us, we're going to move into some really practical things that we can do and learn from these different stages of God's story so that we can play our role in God's story of Shalom. Well, God bless you. We're going to come up and have the last song. And I want to encourage you in reflection to think about where you are in God's story. But before we have the last song and the benediction, what I'd like to do is take the opportunity for us to pray about things in our lives. I know that some people are working through challenges within family life. Other people have challenges with employment. Other people have personal challenges that they're facing. And so just over this 2 to 3 minutes of just quietness, like the music overlay, that you just still your heart. And one of the questions I want you to ask yourself is like, God, what is my role in your story of Shalom? And you might be someone who's like, never even read the Bible, don't even know half the things that Mr. MOIMOI was talking about. But I know there's a story and there's a purpose and there's a role. What's mine? Or perhaps you've been working with that. What does that look like for you? And perhaps you have been in God's story of Shalom for a while and maybe you're tired. and you really need peace for your soul. Well, we know the peace maker, the Prince of Peace. And so in this 2 or 3 minutes, praying for yourself, but I like it when, it says, God blesses those who give. And prayer can be a time where I give thought or prayer to God for someone else, that I consider, instead of thinking bad thoughts about someone who is frustrating me, I pray for them. God, would you bless them? Whatever is causing them to respond the way they are, would you give them peace? So, in this quiet time, reflecting on your role, praying for where you are at, but also giving in prayer for someone else for 2 or 3 minutes. God bless you as you engage in prayer before we sing our last song.